All right, welcome everybody. My name is Chris Haynes. I work for ICF Olson, downtown Minneapolis. I'm here to chat a little bit about how to set up PHPStorm to do proper Drupal development. That's a big thing when it comes to your code and trying to get it into core or get it as a contributed module. You need to they have very tight standards on how to get it working and them maintaining it afterwards. But also, and more importantly, how to set up Xdebug. The primary of the talk is going to be on how to get it set up working in Acquia Dev Desktop, considering most of you guys use that. But also, it's to use to get it set up working with Drupal VM. That's considered at ICF. We're using that as a secondary development environment between the differences of like a front-end developer and a back-end developer. So, given your range of technology, we can support you being able to develop in more than one way. I started working at ICF in November of last year. But my Drupal experience starts about 5 years ago. When I was in school, I started meandering and doing a lot of comparisons between CMSs at that time, like WordPress, Joomla, some Rails ones. Like there was one open source .NET one that I tried, and I ended up doing a project on it. So that's when I kind of got hooked into like, hey, I need to learn more about Drupal, considering everything I've done in research about Drupal says that it's better than almost every single one of these other ones that I'm trying to do. So that kind of got me started. First thing is that we'll go through a little bit of a history of what I thought were IDEs, just because when I was fresh out of college, I thought I knew everything. And I didn't, so go through a few choice editors and IDEs that I went and used along from up until finishing college to now. And the first one is everyone's favorite, Eclipse. If you were a CS student, you went through college, you used Eclipse. You probably didn't use about 95% of its functionality, but you used Eclipse. From there, I learned Vim. This is a popular way of setting up Vim. I used it when I was doing Ruby on Rails development as a student. Really liked it, kind of stuck with it. I still use it today in some of my development environments. And then when I get into Windows world, it was Notepad++. I used that primarily in school because I didn't want to learn Vim at the time. So I actually learned Notepad++ before I learned Vim. And my Rails mentor at the time when I was at the university said, if you learn Vim, you're not going to go back. And so I challenged him, and I said, you can't be really this serious. And once I learned Vim, I never looked back. So he was right. Shortly after that, a couple teachers were like, oh, you should try Sublime Text. It's really awesome. Oh, you should try Atom. Atom's a new one out. You should really use it. One of my coworkers still use it. He keeps complaining, or I keep complaining to him why he's not using PHPStorm, because that's what I'm using today, and he's not doing it. And then this one, like, oh, I don't want to use Eclipse, but I want to use something like it because it's easier to configure, but it still didn't quite get me all the way that I wanted to be. And then, ta-da! PHPStorm and all of its wonderfulness. And I didn't actually think of it. I just grabbed some images online. This is actually using Xdebug. Ironically, the picture that I grabbed is using Xdebug. I didn't notice that until now.
You get a headache from just looking at it?
No. I actually can understand everything on here, and I can figure out what they're trying to do and what they were actually using this for at the time.
You know, Sublime Text actually it has this thing where you just see the code on the whole screen, which is just soothing.
Yeah, but we're in the law department. They don't understand technology, so we're in 4:3 ratio, and I bet you this is like shrunk down in a smaller ratio. But yeah, it's a lot bigger on my screen at work. So those are kind of like the IDEs that I've used personally. I would probably advocate for only one of them when it comes to an actual IDE. When it comes to text editors, you can still use whatever you want. I don't care. This is about PHPStorm. And we're going to move on to the real question. Why? did I use PHPStorm? Number one reason, I didn't have to pay for it. My boss got it for us. Number two, Acquia developers use it. I didn't know this until I watched some of the YouTube videos from DrupalCon because I wasn't special enough to go. And regardless of how strong I thought I was. And I heard it in several videos that them exclusively saying that Acquia developers use this, like, for everything that they do. So I'm like, if they can use it, then I can learn it, and it'll just become like my primary tool, and it kind of did. A few things that I like about it. I hope this slide is easy to read. I just went through and randomly picked colors. Is it? All right. So the code formatting in PHPStorm is awesome. If you set it up the way that you want it to do it, which is for us, it'll be like using commenting on the fly. You can get that. Drupal coding standards. This is basically why you're setting up your code formatting. It's because you don't want to have to remember PSR4 coding standards. I'm sure everybody here knows all the PSR4 coding standards, right? No? A couple of them? I challenged my boss of a couple of them one time. Code completion was also another one, but you kind of get that on almost every IDE you get. But anytime that you don't have to write code, the better, especially for me, since I still can't type without looking at the keyboard. And I asked my brother if that was a problem when I got into this field, and he's like, no, that's fine. You don't spend that much time typing, and now my fingers are sore. Next thing is all the documentation, like the support that you get in there, like right in the IDE. Like you don't even have to leave the IDE. So if you really, really love staring at the same screen for 7-8 hours a day, you're going to love this thing because you don't have to leave it. Integrated Drush console, not default, but you can set it up on a per environment basis. So if we're having our front end developers like building stuff, they'll be using PHPStorm, but they don't necessarily need Drush there, so they won't set it up. But for me, I love Drush. I didn't actually learn about thinking about using Drupal console until I came here. So Drush console was in there for me, and I was able to not have to alt tab just to get into the terminal to actually go through and write my Drush CC all command. Then there's numerous hotkeys. There's tons of hotkeys, and I was told that there's also a plugin that will enforce and make you learn all the hotkeys. Chris Weber actually knows the name of it because I can't remember it right now. What was that one where it popped?
Key promoter.
Key promoter. It is actually, I'm going to actually use this because I think it probably would be a great way to learn it, because I really love when people interrupt me when I'm trying to do something, especially when all it's doing is interrupting you and telling you to use a hotkey. So for me, I think I'm going to use it. I'm probably going to install that one and actually use it because I love hotkeys. I actually love hotkeys so much that I would teach other kids around campus in the CS department what Control V did and what Control C did. And that's inevitably actually why I'm not a very good typist, because I use Control C and Control V a lot during typing class instead of actually typing. But good thing I didn't need typing to get a job doing this. But if you're looking for all of the hotkeys, like there's a nice little thing out there of like on JetBrains of they're saying these are key hotkeys that you need to know. Double shift is one of them, which allows you to do a search on anything that you have. Like I think that's like project wide. You can just search for anything, functions, like your variables that you think you maybe mistyped a variable, and so on. And then Xdebug, it's integrated by default, unless someone's messing with you and changes your values on you when you're not looking. I haven't had that happen to me yet, but then again, I'm not at the university. The students at the university would have loved to mess with me, but the Xdebug is working pretty much by default with minimal setup, and I'll get to that shortly. You would have thought that last thing would have been a good way of a segue into setting up Xdebug for Acquia Dev Desktop, like getting into it, but it's actually not. I need to actually get you guys set up to working with PHPStorm and getting it to just work for Drupal development. And the nice thing about this is that there is on the documentation site for JetBrains is they provided a video for it, and then they went through and their documentation is just like one huge page list. And this is like kind of like leads into a nice story of like why I'm advocating for it. And it was when I was learning how to make my first module, I was taking a module development class, and 15 minutes before the class, I was like all set up, had Notepad open, or Notepad++ open, and I was about ready to just get ready and go. And I'm like, wait, my boss bought me PHPStorm. I should try it, because nobody else is. And so I did, and I'm just like, all right, I went to Google, I'm like, PHPStorm Drupal. Very first result was, ta-da, this Confluence page. It is exactly everything you need to not only set up Drupal 7 in PHPStorm, but also to do Drupal 8. And the really only difference is that you add a couple more plugins for the IDE that are exclusive for Symfony and the Symfony Drupal Bridge. And that's actually the names of them. It's a Symfony plugin and the Symfony Drupal Bridge. But from there, I kind of just went up to, actually I shouldn't have done that. I went into like setting it up, and only 15 minutes, and I just quickly ran through this whole page. And if I can Alt-Tab over to the page for this is massive. So I got this page, and I was like scrolling down and scrolling through it, and I'm just like, wow, page is huge. Like, look at the little thing that you get to scroll. I don't think I'm gonna have enough time to get through this. And sure enough, I just opened it up and I started walking through this, and this little green thing showed up. It wasn't green in my ID because I'd already changed to using the darker theme, but it just says, hey, this looks like it's Drupal. Would you like me to enable Drupal support? And I'm like, yes, of course. But I actually don't need slides because everything that you guys need to do this is on their pages. I thought about taking their slides and taking their page and turning it into slides and sharing it with you, but it's easier to share a link. So the one thing that I went through is like, all right, you want to enable this stuff, so it's like gives you this little prompt that says, hey, here it is. Where's Drupal? There's Drupal. And for most of them, when I do this, it just says, look, I know which version of Drupal you are. I know everything already. So I didn't have to do anything. I just hit OK, and away we went. And I just kept going down through this on setting up certain things. And obviously, I was doing a module development class, so I'm like, all right, creating a new module. Oh, I'll get to that when we start the class. So I kind of just skipped over, and I just kept going. And then I started searching for keywords. I was like, oh, what else do I want to set up? This is really easy. Within 2 minutes, I'm working in Drupal. So I'm like, what else do I need? Oh, code formatting. So I just did a quick search on the page for formatting, and boom, it sent me to a section which was, I can actually do the search, but you guys can't see it because technology is awesome. And maybe I didn't search for it. I thought it was on here. Or maybe it's just because it's a Confluence page. But I ended up just scrolling through it, and I found the section where it's like, hey, you actually want to do this. And then what I realized is that all this stuff, just because that plugin wasn't installed, I actually had to restart PHPStorm in order for all the rest of the stuff to automatically happen. As soon as I restarted it, it started prompting me for more questions, like namespacing. Do you want to set up the paths to everything so it knows where everything is? And it just kept going and going, and it was prompting me, and I didn't even have to look at this page anymore. So I'm like, this is actually awesome. And I'm doing this while I'm listening to the class, prepare to get going, and then I finally got it all set up, and I went through all the way through this whole section, even to the point where we got down to the Drupal 8 stuff. I'm like, well, I'm not doing Drupal 8, so I won't do any of that. But it went through into like setting like the code formatting, which is actually using Drupal standards. When you install that Drupal plugin, it brings in what Drupal has for a coding standard, and it has that for a selection box, and it actually then just prompts you with a question. Actually, it's not a question. It prompts you with a box immediately after you say, do you want to enable Drupal support? Then we'll just do it. So from here, since we all love demos, I'm going to go through a demo and hopefully get everything right. And for the rest of the slides, they're actually like the overview of everything on how to do it. I could share it with you, or you guys could actually just get the links from like the last slide. But if you guys want me to share them, I can. Yeah, want me to share? Oh, yeah, okay. Sharing. You create a project, open a project, create new project from existing files, and you can also check out from version control. And that's all the default that you get right there. Most of the times I'm just opening. When I do the Drupal VM kind of setup, I do this one because it's a remote server. Even though like you do an NFS share locally to your machine, so your files are local. I do this one where I set up so it gives you the option of saying local files, remote server. But for Acquia Dev Desktop, everything's local. So I'm just going to open my project. And it is in Sites, Dev Desktop, and here you can actually see the little black icon. That's basically saying that like it knows a few things already about it, but it shouldn't know enough about it right now. And if it does, I can actually restart. But you open it, and normally this is where it would say, "Is this a Drupal project?" And it's like right up in the it's right up in the top here. Hey, there it is. It did work for me. So you just click enable. And there it pops that up, so you just enable this, and it's already pointed to the path that you need to, and it knows that it's Drupal 7. And so I always click apply because I'm weird from the Windows world. I don't trust the Windows world. They say you don't have to click apply, but I do anyways. And then it's like, oh, here, style formatting. Do you want to set it? Yes, you do. And look, in here it shows everything that you want to do. Like this is just the default, but you can go through into spacing and all these things that are normally set up for how you want your code to automatically get formatted to, which is awesome. But to keep everything simple, do you want me to stop?
No.
Okay. To keep everything simple, once you get to this thing, if you just basically go apply and okay, then it's done. It's already it'll format your code, all your arrays, everything in the way that Drupal wants it to be. And so that's the majority of what you're going to do just to get Drupal working. And that's what you're going to do on the majority of your projects. You don't have to do much. For our end, we're going to actually start enabling a lot more code validation and code sniffing, and that's a little bit more. I consider that to be more of like an intermediate thing. So if I ever get back to doing more sessions to doing that, like that would be like the next step. Because in theory, you still want to do more steps to your code, but for most of the code that you're going to be writing, this is the perfect place to start. And so when going through, you can kind of see that you have your integrated terminal right here. You get basically on the top half, you get almost the same thing that you would in any kind of the more advanced IDEs, where you kind of get like your little nerd tree of stuff. This is where all your files are. But you normally don't get stuff under here, and I know there's a lot of plugins for the IDEs that allow you to include like a direct terminal, but this one, like this is like kind of like what you'd get. And so one step beyond this is the Xdebug side of things, which we'll get into next. And I have found the perfect thing because Google is awesome. And I found Acquia Dev Desktop's notes on how to configure Xdebug for Acquia Dev Desktop. And I made sure that I went through these several times because everybody knows that sometimes everyone's documentation is this thing like this? Okay. Like documentation is not always up to date, and actually this one is. So it's a great place to go to try to figure out if you forget how to do it. This is one of the links I have on my last slides as far as where I got certain things. But when it comes to Acquia Dev Desktop, let me full screen this so I can work my magic. You open Acquia Dev Desktop, I'm sure everyone's used to this view. You click here, and you get all like your basic information. And one thing that most people haven't probably gone to is going to preferences and looking at things behind to this config area. And this config area is where it basically defines everything that your local Acquia Dev Desktop sandbox is going to run as. And so the one thing that you have to do here that they don't actually, that like I wasn't actually explicit, I figured that Acquia Dev Desktop would have Xdebug on by default. My bad for assuming something. And so you basically find the version of PHP that you're using, which is, for me, I've always used the default PHP, even though I should be using 5.6 now. You just come down to the version that you're using, you click edit, and what doing that will do is in like your native editor, it will bring in, open up the php.ini file. So all you have to do is search do a search on xdebug.so. And that will take you down to the section where normally this is commented out, which is their way of turning Xdebug off. And it's a performance thing. They want your development environment to be as performant as possible. But when you start getting into a lot of issues where you need to stop your code, you come in here, uncomment that line, and then add the line right below it, which says now enable it. When you're done here, you're going to close this, you save the file, and then close the file. Close out of here, stop, wait for Apache MySQL to stop, and then start. And what that does now is for the version of PHP that you're using, it has now reread that file, and so it now knows Xdebug is here, and it is enabled. From there, you're going to go into PHPStorm, and you're going to get to the top right here, where there is the listening thing for Xdebug. Not entirely sure why they want you to turn this on now, considering there's not going to do much. You have to actually come into here to edit your configurations and add the server that actually has Xdebug running on it. So you come over to the side, come down here and go to PHP Remote Debug. Pick a nice name. I always say that this is TC DC 80. I always reference my servers by the environment that I'm using. So if it's Acquia Dev Desktop, I always tag it with ADD. And if it's Drupal VM, I just go DVM. So that I know that if I'm trying to adjust things, that I don't accidentally click like two things that could be named the same, except for I have one that was open in ADD and one that was open in Drupal VM. From here, there's a section right here on servers that you also have to add the explicit server. So you come in, give it, obviously again, give it a proper name, and I usually just go like prod dev and stage, depending on what you're actually running on. Like usually you're only going to have dev for this particular one server that you're putting in. Sometimes you can have multiple. I haven't actually ran across that situation at all. And then you're going to get to your host. The host is going to be exactly what you found in Xdebug or in Acquia Dev Desktop, and that's going to be the URL of the server itself that you had on that one screen that it gives you. I always paste that in with the port. Make sure you take port off and then add it there. And make sure that the debugger is Xdebug. Apply. Okay. So now it knows where your server is. So PHPStorm's listening. It knows where the server is that it's listening from. Make sure you apply. Okay. And so you can see up here that it's there. And now there's a little bug that you get. So for me, I thought, hey, yes, we're there. Like, oh wait, no, this isn't what I want. I put this information in. So I went back to the documentation, thought I was pretty comfortable with where I was at, and I found out that you need to do something in your browser. So I went to the site, and I found that there's actually JavaScript things that you put into the browser that you click a link that tells Xdebug to start for that particular browser session. And I was using that for the longest time, and I was like, that's not very efficient. Like, there's got to be something better. And there was. There's actually a Chrome plugin that is for debugging. You can turn debugging on, you can turn debugging off. If you go into the options, you can come in here and change which one you're using. Eclipse is actually the default, ironically. Go down, pick PHPStorm. This automatically changes to the word PHPStorm because that's the default IDE key that it uses to search. Save, close out of here, go back to where you're at, and then start debugging. And so this is the page that you're actually going to debug. This is the session. This is the tab that you're debugging. Chrome treats each one individually, so you're good. And so now you'll come in here, and I've already added a breakpoint into the index file. This is a Drupal 7 site, so I figured, what's the best thing you can put a breakpoint on? Well, it's, bootstrapping Drupal. Well, everybody's most known artifact when it comes to like everybody knows what is happening when Drupal gets bootstrapped, right? You know everything that happens? No? My boss might think he does. He actually gave me a nice book reference to read through of what actually happens in that process, and I found it to be a lot easier. Oh, okay. So my IDE is smarter than I am. I forgot to actually add in the IDE key to here, which is why it popped up before. So there's another thing about you should be using Xdebug or PHPStorm and X. It's smarter than you. So you put that key in there and all that makes sure is that if you are actually debugging two things at once, so if I would actually have another Acquia Dev Desktop site open and running, I can actually put like PHPStorm 2 and then do the same thing in here, add the server and go PHPStorm 2, and that way it won't actually conflict the traffic. Click debug, and then now you get a debugger console down here instead of the terminal. For this case, I went through and I put the breakpoint in on the page. There's a couple ways that you can actually reload the page. When you're running single monitor, it's really hard to see, but you can hit the page reload in here, like it reloads that current session. I've never gotten that to work on the initial time because I think it needs to see the session of this scope going. And so when you refresh the page here, it automatically takes you back to PHPStorm and stops you. So if you come back to here, you notice it's just sitting there spinning because Xdebug stopped PHP in its execution. And it'll sit there and spin until you start going through steps. So if you notice, we've got all of our variables here of everything that started on what's happening when you actually start bootstrapping Drupal. So if you ever needed to figure out, you're like, God, my render array, like something's just missing from it. I can't figure out where it's going. You can put in a breakpoint and start stepping through as the render array gets built. And it will show you what's happening. And then as you're using it, you can do the same thing. Put another breakpoint in there and then just go through here. And if you learn the hotkeys, everything's a lot better. But you just start stepping through your code and it'll start opening files. So here's the bootstrap include file. And it'll just start stepping through your code like you would normally see in like Eclipse. Except for Eclipse, it takes like 8 hours to set this up. Terrible. And technology flickers. But like you could just sit here and step through it, and if you wanted to figure out what's happening, you'll notice that obviously the include file does most of it, but you'll see down here that you can actually open up your cookies, like your get variable, your server variables, your globals. It knows what your Drupal root is. It just has all your variables there for you to do any debugging that you want. This is the most generic kind of example that you can get, but it works anywhere except the front end. So this is PHPStorm, not WebStorm. There is a plugin which allows you that you can add to the browser up here, and it is actually this plugin right there, which is that was close. That was almost good. Which is the JetBrains plugin, and that is I thought that was all I had to do when I first did it, and I actually realized that that's for WebStorm. That allows you to actually go through, you put this in there, and it allows you to put breakpoints like you would normally in like Chrome console, but you can do it in your code inside of PHPStorm. I tried to put I was putting the breakpoint on a PHP line, and it just kept refreshing. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out what's going on, this isn't working. But as soon as I moved it to like a template file, it stopped. And then it allowed me to go through and check things that you would normally see in the JavaScript side of things. So make sure that if you're going through, I recommend this plugin. I don't think I have it on the slides now because it was kind of like a last minute addition. And it was like Monday that we, one of our remote guys found it or had it and used it because he was using Xdebug. It's a very good plugin, especially if you're trying to use Xdebug with PHPStorm. So if you wanted to just continue through it, now it sits there, it says waiting for connection with the IDE PHPStorm. because I basically just told it to break out of what I'm stepping through. And now if you actually go back to Chrome, your page is no longer sitting there spinning, it actually loaded the site. So that's using, and how to set it up, how to set up Xdebug on Acquia Dev Desktop. If we move forward to Drupal VM, it's a little bit more complicated. There's a few sides of it that were even tricky for me to first figure out. But what you need to do is, since Drupal VM is actually, it's a virtual machine running on your server, it is a remote server. So whenever I set up, the setup for PHPStorm is the same. Let me close my project and disconnect from the current server for Xdebug. With it being a virtual machine, it acts like it's basically a machine in the cloud. So it's going to have to map, when you do your Xdebugging, the paths from var www location on the server to the actual location of the files on, even though it's an NFS share. I don't think they have a way of instantly mapping that up, unless I'm wrong. Chris, is there a way that you can instantly just map to get it to work?
Kind of. You need to use Xdebug's remote callback or remote connect setting.
Okay.
But yeah, working with Xdebug within a VM requires additional configuration.
Yep. So, also one thing, I'm not going to go through and set up a Drupal VM because they take about, on my machine, about 15-20 minutes to set up, even with Ansible. So I set one up already ahead of time, and I adjusted the files as I needed to so that it would work. And in Drupal VM, you get this default.config.yaml file. And by default, if you don't change anything, you just download Drupal VM and you say banker down. You're going to get the most recent server, you're going to get the most recent everything, you get PHP 7, you get Ubuntu 16.04, and Xdebug is not turned on. So in order to turn it on, just so you know, I'm abandoning my slides at this point because this is better. You basically get this YAML file of basic variables that you can just say, this is what I want, so I'm going to change it. So I left everything as much the same as I can when it comes to setting it up. I had to change the IP because I have multiple Vagrant machines already running on my machine. The one things you do that are must in order to get this working is there's an installed extras section. You have to uncomment Xdebug, because what that does is what we did for at the Acquia Dev Desktop is it actually loads the Xdebug mod for PHP. With the Drupal VM servers, they kind of set it up like it would be a production server, so it's not just one line in the PHP.ini file. You actually have to make sure that when PHP is set up on the server, that it grabs that mod, and then the part in the part below it for Xdebug is this section right here, and this is what you'll find on the documentation for it, is do we want to enable it, yes or no? I went through and I enabled everything by default, like normally CLI, remote, and remote connect back. Those are the only ones that are set to 1. The default enable is always set to 0, and the coverage enable is always set to 0. I had a good question when I tested this session as a dry run at work. Someone asked me what coverage enable was, and I said, that's a good question. I just turned it to 1 and I didn't care, because I just figured they said to turn it on, and I was going to probably get to it. But there's actually a way to have code coverage, like coverage against your code, and Xdebug can validate that for you, and that's what that was supposed to be for. And so I actually learned something earlier this week about that. But this is the most important one right here. Xdebug enable default. That'll turn it on. This is you want to make sure that the default of this at 256 works, but if you started getting bigger sites, I think you're going to have to bump this up a little bit, because everything that gets run and going through it can actually hit this max nested level. And I think this is actually the amount of nested functions that can actually be called in one request. So the bigger your site, the more you might have to tweak it a little bit. But for most small sites that you're running, you can just turn this to 1 and you're done. And that's all you have to do. From here, this is where you go vagrant up, and you wait 20 minutes, go get some coffee, go BS with your friends, come back, and hopefully there's no red marks for vagrant up when it comes to building the virtual machine. I'm already located where I can do this, but I always halt my machines when I'm not using them. So I'm running vagrant up, and all this is doing is turning on the virtual machine. It recognized that there's nothing different in the provisioning files that needs to change, so it's just going to start it up, and then it's going to ask me for a password because it's doing an NFS share, and then it should boot up. Here we go. Oh, and Daryl, just because you didn't see the password, it went. He told me a nice story about the first time he got into the Linux world and he was trying to type in a password and he didn't see nothing. And he thought nothing was happening. So now the virtual machine is running. With Drupal VM, you get, actually I wonder if I have the link here. You get the default IP that you chose in that file, and you get this nice user interface of everything that you would normally need that's running on your Drupal VM. And so the important part is like doc root and basically the host name. So whenever you set up your PHPStorm for this project, you need to have the host name. So let's go to PHPStorm. I've opened up the project. This one is slightly different. I didn't have time to actually go back and change the IDE of files for it to prompt us. But it already knows it's a Drupal project. But the one thing I do need to do is I need to edit the configurations to add that server. So I need to add another server for remote debug. And this one is going to be named DC and Drupal VM. The server for this one is a remote server, and so like I didn't actually change anything. So it actually recognized it from when I had it originally put in here. There we go. So the host is Drupal VM.dev. Port is 80 because Drupal VM runs everything by default on 80 up there, and it does naming conventions for everything on the back end of the server for like the virtual hosts. And so it comes through here, and this is the conflict, the problem of running Drupal VM. It's better for us as developers, but when it comes to debugging, you actually have to map. So I pointed to my local files, and I needed to tell it that it is here on the server. So whenever you click and put in a debug or a check words breakpoint, if it can't find the file, like it can find the file locally, but it's looking for it on the server. And since you haven't mapped any of the paths, this is the part where I basically stopped to say there's got to be a better way to do this, because I was doing all these manually. I just copied one section of it and just pasted it in every time I needed it. But there wasn't I couldn't find a good way to do this, and I was actually hoping to meet someone here that knew how to do this, where at one point you could say, here's the doc root of my Drupal VM NFS share, here's the doc root on my server, map everything, so that it would just inherently take care of it. And that's what I was hoping to figure out. Is there a way to do that?
That's what the screen is for. And you don't need to go file by file. You can step up the tree and say, hey, this is where my Drupal folder is, and then point it to where the Drupal folder is on your remote, and then you're good.
Oh, okay. So probably because I started a lot lower on my initial one.
The initial exception occurs to say, I need this file. So you go, okay, well, here's a specific file. But you could say, all right, I'll show you where the files are, and then you should be able to navigate to where the file you need.
Okay. So go ahead and save it, apply and save it. So now it's got the server.
Is this the point where I interject things, though?
Well, if anybody has any questions.
Because you
So,
don't. Oh, okay.
but you can interject whenever you want at this point, because this is where I left it, or I left off, when it comes to certain things that I could get to working with an Xdebug. Like, I got it where you can actually put a breakpoint in now. This is a Drupal 8 site, so I did it where the kernel starts to load, and it did everything, and I was just like, God, there's got to be a better way of doing it, which makes sense, where it wasn't inherent even in their documentation that if you just do this in one place, you don't have to worry about it again, because by default it said, oh, you need this specific file first, which was like the auto load file.
Right.
So I went down to include that file, which kind of just screws up the whole thing. So if I probably would go in and delete all these other things, all the other paths, and you can actually do that in an XML file if you're brave enough to go and venture into XML land and just go through and just delete all the rest of them and just leave that top one, so that you don't have to use the UI of PHPStorm. But he had a question.
Yeah, is there a way to do this if you're just developing directly on the server?
Yeah.
Way to do that?
Yes. You built the server yourself?
It's in a hosted environment, but we have a dedicated development area.
And-
Development server.
Okay, and so I'm assuming you can open a ticket to tell them to install Xdebug. That's probably what you probably have to do, is whatever through their ticketing system, just say, hey, I want Xdebug turned on.
Assuming it's all set up.
Yeah, and they'll do it, and then what you're going to do, it's the same process as this Drupal VM, because this Drupal VM is a remote server. It's a virtual machine on here, so it doesn't matter if it's within my 192.168, my local IP network, or if it's out on the server somewhere,
Well,
or out on the cloud somewhere.
I'm going to quibble, because it's what I do, right? The one thing you have to be very cognizant of there is the way Xdebug works is it's establishing a network connection back to your IDE. So if it's out in the cloud and you're in a native environment, it may have trouble connecting to you on port 9000. Even if you don't have NAT as an issue, you may have the problem of your network administrator may have blocked incoming everything.
Yep.
So you might need to tunnel it over SSH in that scenario.
And this is actually a good definition of how much me and my boss think alike, because I was actually just going to say that.
He was, I just,
And I
I
don't know,
was tired of looking
but when it comes to the connection, you have to make sure you have a viable connection to and from. So if you're working from home, you probably set up your own thing, which is great. But if you're working for like my brother, which is Best Buy, he can't even remote home, or he can't even he can't even connect to his machine because they don't allow that specific port. And if your work doesn't allow that specific port, you kind of SOL. But if you got a viable reason saying, hey, this is our development environment, we need to use Xdebug to do it, then most of the times they'll allow it, and they'll monitor the traffic through it. So you might have your pipe is really, really small, but they'll still give you a pipe. So at this point, is there any questions on how to set this up? I kind of went fast, but anyone got any questions? I don't think it's complicated as long as you take your time to go through it. For me, my biggest problem was making the assumption that I knew the answer, because I thought it seemed like it should have been that straightforward, but it wasn't.
So you did not run into the thing that literally trips me up every single time when I don't use Xdebug for a couple of months and then come back to it for whatever reason. The way I always end up with it set up, you have to pass Xdebug session start as a query parameter. And I noticed for you, it was firing off regardless of that. So which one of those, is that the default enable that makes it fire without having to be triggered, or which one of those parameters does that magic?
That green bug right there.
Okay. What does that do when you click it?
So what that green bug is doing, I'll see if I can quick find the documentation on
It
this.
creates a cookie,
Ah!
and it sets the Xdebug, basically the same variable that Chris is setting in his the PHP.ini setting to set the Xdebug IDE key. So it sets the IDE key to be PHPStorm, or whatever you've configured the button to set.
So here's another page that's on there. It's the marklets that the PHPStorm has. You go there, if you can put in whatever you want, but by default it's always PHPStorm because they inherently think that you're only working on one project at a time. actually a really bad joke. You hit generate and it gives you like these links right here. This is based off of that IP, so anything running locally on your machine will work. If you're running on a remote server, this is where you actually have to put the remote server thing in there, and that is also specifically for the Xend debugger, not Xdebug. Since we're using Xdebug, everything's a lot easier. You just go, here's your IDE key, generate, and it gives you these bookmarks. These are not very easy bookmarks to set, where you can right-click this and say, save as a bookmark. Because I couldn't find it.
I think you can literally drag it into your bookmark bar. Yes, you can.
And so that's what I had to do. I created a folder up here called Xdebug, and I dragged each one up there manually. I'm a computer scientist. I want to find an automated way to do this. So that's what I had, and that's what I was using for the longest time, was just had a folder, start, stop. There's a way to do a profiler and a tracer. I haven't gotten into that, but I will get into it as soon as I run into a reason to use it. But any other questions? No? Think hard.
That green blob you were talking about,
Yes,
that's provided by.
it's a Chrome plugin.
What plugin is it?
It is, I think,
Xdebug helper.
yeah, Xdebug helper. I think that one's exclusive to Chrome too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I forgot you configure by cookie, so you could just go in and edit this cookie instead of.
Correct.
Firefox is very similar.
Yeah. I think Firebug does it by default, doesn't it? Like has it in its whole. Firebug's pretty big for.
It's been a long time since I used Firefox.
Yeah, I use Firefox for. Huh?
Internet Explorer.
Internet Explorer? I think you can leave with that.
You can drag the link up to.
You can, you can drag the link. That's basically what you're gonna
There you
do.
go.
I'll do this with bookmarks.
You should. If you'd have said IE8, I would have laughed harder. But anything else? I think you had one.
Yeah, I have my own unique server, so is it better to set that up specifically on that server, or set it up so that I put it on my desktop that goes to the server?
So you're talking about Xdebug running on the server. You like so Xdebug, the software needs to be running with PHP. So it's in the way that Drupal VM sets it up. It's a mod, kind of like Mod Apache if you're using Mod Apache. So it needs to be installed on the server in order for it to actually work. If you don't have Xdebug there, regardless of what you do on this end, nothing's going to happen. So yes. And you can actually, if you're doing that for a server, you can actually explicitly in that PHP INI file put a specific IDE key. So by default, like you notice on the Drupal VM configuration page, it was right there. It's part of those 5 little sections there. It's actually right below the 5 little sections that say trigger on, yes or no. There's actually the point where it's the nested thing where I said if you don't turn this up, like PHP is going to explode. Right above that, there's the PHPStorm IDE key. So when Drupal VM builds, it adds that to the INI file for you.
Can you also use it with Get?
With what? Get?
Yeah, the source stuff.
You can compile it by source that way too, yeah. But you still have to update your PHP to INI file when you're done. So yes, not many people like to brag about building PHP from source or from binaries, but you can do it that way. I had a buddy who bragged about it to me, and I just really didn't care.
I just want to have a version control.
Oh, like doing it with Git.
Yeah.
Oh,
Version
okay.
of PHP.ini file.
Yeah.
You can. It's not recommended by Jeff for like the Drupal VM side of things, but if you really wanted to say, here, this is the stuff that I need to remember, yeah. For us, I just got done with a client where one of my other Mac that I still have because I got to copy stuff over. Like when I got hired on from a contractor to a full-time employee, my contractor AD account just stopped working. They turned everything off. So on my old Mac, I couldn't even log in anymore. I couldn't really do anything. And so I rebuilt the entire development environment for that client in Drupal VM. And for them, yes, we versioned that file. It was ignored by default by Jeff Geerling or Jeff Geerling. I don't know how to pronounce it. I've never met them. Is it Geerling? He puts it in, like, ignores it. But we, since it was a private repo, just added it in there so that the next person who grabbed this VM to work on it didn't have to worry about editing or changing any of these files. And I actually versioned all the Ansible files as well, like all the different roles for it, because I wanted them to just say, up, done.
You use it on the code though too, so if you make your own module, you version that module into your.
Normally, PHPStorm stuff is not done at a module basis. It's always done on the server and the IDE itself. So the IDE files, I think I know what you're saying, is when you build a module in PHPStorm, you get a hidden folder called an idea folder. That folder can be versioned, but it is by default ignored by most ignore folders when the module is created explicitly within within PHPStorm. But you can version it, and that's actually a thought that I had went through my head a bunch of times to say, hey, do we version it? Do we not version it? Because if I set this up, because I'm setting up the project for a junior dev that we got coming in, do I want him to have to go through the same process? Yes and no. But there's also, I think, a problem where they're storing paths based off of your machine. So he would have to update those paths and change it, or they would have to start using relative paths. And I can't remember if I actually went into the idea folder and tried to find what those paths were or not to see if they were relative or not. But that had to come across my mind too. So there is the folder to version if you want. Yeah.
I remember seeing on the initial install, and I suppose there might be a way to import after you've installed, but PHPStorm prompts you for that existing configuration, which is similar to what I think you're asking about.
I don't know, have you ever seen that before, Chris? I'm pretty sure. I know you can import configuration for it.
Oh, I think I get what you're saying. Yeah, if you go to the I guess because Macs are weird, the file menu, and then you can export settings.
You know what? Macs are so weird that you can go like this and type in export, which Windows can't do, by the way. And there's the export settings thing. It actually showed you where it was in the menu tree. But yeah, you can export your settings this way. And then import them the same way, just by going on silly Mac's search function and search for import.
Glad we've established that.
I wish Windows would put that into their OS. A better way of searching through for finding things.
Maybe they would be invalidating a patent if they did. Just saying.
Probably.
Probably.
How much does it cost?
PHPStorm? That's a good question. I think I can give you a roundabout guesstimate. I don't know how much it costs on the commercial side. My boss's boss, Brett Otzenberger, is the one who instigated it with us. He would know how much he paid or how much we paid for several things, but they do have their pricing out there. And I know it's if you're...
You get a break, I believe, I want to say.
Yeah, so on the commercial side, you get a break at so many, but on the personal side, all educational institutions, if you're a teacher or a student, you get to use all their software for free. If you're not, then it's like you pay for one thing. It's about $200. I think $200. So what is it? 100. So it's $100 per version. So if you're doing PHPStorm and WebStorm, I think once you get past 2, it's almost easier to buy the whole thing, the whole suite.
Isn't that a subscription on?
It is subscription. It's yearly subscription. Yep. But
It was $49.
yeah. But when it comes down to it, yeah, when you're working on several projects a year, and you have to charge a client to set up a development environment, you're charging them basically for this. And once you get about to 4 or 5 clients, you've actually seen a return on investment for that year. But that was one thing I was going to try to dig into more. Statistics on how much of an ROI you would actually get as a small business firm, and what would warrant you to buy this over using some sort of free IDE like Clips and deal with the pains of that.
If you want to save the money, there's an early adopter program, and you can download it now, and it will expire around June. I just got the money.
Yeah. That's right, I remember that.
July 22nd.
Mhm.
So every 2 or 3 months, you're going to have to reinstall it. But when I pulled it in and said, do you want to pull in your settings?
Yeah, and there's plenty of time, they always give everyone plenty of time to beta their software to see whether or not you find a need to keep it and use it and actually purchase it. I think almost,
Early adopter program.
Yeah.
We have, PHPStorm.
they have another program too for like,
It's fully functional.
they have another program too for open source. They'll give you, they'll give you a deal if you're an open source thing too.
You have to be in like the top 100 projects now. They changed it, because I used to be able to get it free for my Drupal modules, and then they want to change it so I'm the top 100. You can't.
It's kind of like that iOS, like every time you update your iPhone, you get that one agreement that's like 50 pages long and nobody reads it and you just click enter. Anyone see the South Park episode they did on that? That's kind of like what I feel about every time that they update their agreements on how they change things. You always have to end up going down a rabbit hole to figure out what did they change and what you can actually still do. But I think the only thing that's still like stayed through the test of time is that educational institution thing.
You know what we did once in the Bay Area? I called up one of the representatives, and they, for Batman, they gave actually anybody who buy it, then I think they gave a 20% discount or something.
Okay.
So if you approach them as a group, I'm pretty sure they will give you some discount.
Yeah. There's always there's always something you can do. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, I'm just gonna go buy it because I don't feel like jumping through the hoops. But if you really do try to figure out something about it, because obviously if it's an IDE and you're gonna pay for it, you better at least have your your ducks in a row when it comes to using
You know,
it.
if you just basically, if you do this for and you just look at what you get,
Yep.
$100 is nothing.
Yeah. Thanks everybody.